Well, welcome to We Don't Color on the Dog. I'm Rick Outson. We've got with us attorney Troy Rafferty, longtime friend. Troy, thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Rick. It's always a pleasure.
Well, this for us is a sad story. Victor Tony Jones, who murdered a couple in 1990, is will be executed unless something changes at the governor's office on September 30th at 6 p.m. But there are some circumstances here. It was a brutal murder, without a doubt. But this is one of, the Dozier case boys. He was in Okeechobee. It was a state reform school that created these monsters. You put out an amicus brief to not to free him but to not execute him. Talk a little bit about why you did that, Troy.
Well, it's one of those situations. Obviously, I've been very close with the Dozier case and the Dozier issue, and gotten to know these survivors, and I've seen firsthand what happened at that reform school, and it just when I read everything and having known about the studies involving childhood trauma and the effects that has and the lasting and permanent effects that has on young adults, it's amazing. And so it really boiled down to me, because I am not anti-death penalty. I am not. I think justice this is what's important, and sometimes justice calls for the sword, and sometimes justice calls for mercy. And this isn't a situation where asking for this gentleman to be excused from what he did. It's more a principle of, why should the state murder a victim of the state? The state created him, just like the gulags in Russia. This school, so-called school, created these folks, put them in a torture chamber, and put them through the most just hellacious things you could ever imagine. Now we're going to execute them for being the people that they created. And it's not right, Rick. And sometimes, like I said, when we're looking at situations like this, we have to look at what is just. And what is just is for him to pay for his crimes. But we should also take into consideration the fact that he was created this way by the state of Florida through the abuse at their hands.
Right. This case that y'all were involved in, you personally were involved in it, involved Dozier over in Mariana and this other boys' camp in Okeechobee.
Hmm.
Victor Tony Jones that was there. I traveled with you over to meet a group of the survivors of the Dozier School, and it was chilling. I'm getting goosebumps now just thinking of walking on that camp, that boys' school in Mariana, and seeing the White House where they behind the cafeteria where these boys were sexually abused and beaten, and listening to the men tell those stories with tears coming down their eyes, remembering it. And then you actually, in talking to the various people that have been involved in the White House boys case, is how many of the boys that went through that school and through Okeechobee were damaged forever. They committed suicide, drug abuse. They did, several of them resorted to crime. Some of them we don't even know where they are, have
Right.
disappeared completely.
Sometimes it's hard to tell how many of the Dozier victims have been executed by the state already, because of the fact that the records are so shoddy. I mean, we're still, out of the 55 bodies that have been recovered, I mean, they had to go back and try and piece together who all these remains were. I mean, there's still records out there of a number of children who checked in, and there's no record that they ever checked out. The Hotel California, so to speak, except this was not a hotel, it was a torture chamber.
Talk about a little bit for our viewers that why these boys were put in these schools.
So the kids were put in the schools for literally the most minor of infractions, skipping school, smoking cigarettes, being incorrigible, whatever the hell that means. I mean, for minor offenses, and kept there and forced into labor. in the fields and in the mills, and it was free labor for the county and for the industries. And so that's what it was. There was no schooling going on. It was work and then be tortured at night. And what would happen is the children would be lying in bed at night, and the guards would just pick randomly some of the children, take them to this building called the White House, and torture them with a, and they always used the same implement, both at Okeechobee and at Dozier. So we know this was systematic, because Okeechobee was opened up obviously after Dozier because of the overcrowding, if you can imagine, at Dozier. So they had too many kids to torture, so they opened up Okeechobee. And so they did that, and of course, they would take them into the White House at night, and they used the White House because it had the loudest exhaust system, and it would quiet the children's screams as they tortured them. There were two beating rooms and two rape rooms, one for the blacks and one for the whites, one each. And because God forbid you rape a white kid in the same bed that you raped a black kid, and so that's what we're dealing with. And that's what these kids, they lived in fear, constant fear all the time about whether they were going to live or die, whether their friend in the bunk next to them was going to be there in the morning, because so many kids would be taken out of their bed at night, taken for whatever purposes, to the medical experiments, to the torture, to whatever, to be raped, and then ultimately, in a lot of instances, killed and dumped into unmarked graves. And these kids lived with this, and to not take into consideration in the sentencing phase of these folks what it was, what created them. In this particular case, Rick, one of the interesting aspects is too is this gentleman is intellectually disabled. He's got an IQ less than 70, and he is placed in Okeechobee. He is abused. He watches other kids be abused. He has to witness other kids being raped. He has to engage in blanket parties where there's group beatings. He has to participate. He has to watch children be put into dryers, stuffed into dryers, and murdered. And all of these things are going on for children, Rick. And to think that doesn't, to me, it's mind boggling. And the really interesting aspect of this particular instance that I did a lot of work and research into, really one of the interesting aspects of it is because of his abuse, because of everything, they tried to present this evidence back many years ago, but basically the court said it's unreliable, that this abuse actually took place. Okay. That's basically, I mean, I'm summarizing
Right.
everything, but essentially, but now you have the state recognizing it through the victims compensation program that the state signed, and the state did the right thing in this particular instance. They should have done it many, many, many years ago. They should have never allowed this to happen. It was well known, as one of the governors at the time said, this was the most unbelievable, that if any of our children, I think the statement was, if any of our children were at that school, we would be there, we would show up there with rifles. I mean, the deplorable conditions and everything. And what I'm talking about is, take this into account in deciding whether he serves out his life in prison, which he has done for the last 30 years, or whether you murder him.
When this trial took place, these camps were still going on. I mean, that which would give some credence to, well, a judge said this is all fanciful, this was all made up, when because these places didn't get closed until a little over 10 years ago. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what's
2011. It
amazing
was
about
they
it.
were open 100. Well, Dozier was open for 100 years.
Right.
Okeechobee for 60.
Yeah. So these were still active, facilities that were operating for. And I don't know when the trial was. We know the murders were 1990. Maybe the trial was 93, 94. These facilities were still operating, so a judge might not want to admit that this was going on. But like you said, they finally did shut them down, and now we know that we're getting the stories and the documentation and unmarked graves. We're seeing all this. We're not taking any of that into account, which is bothersome.
Well, and it's hypocrite. I'm trying to think if hypocritical is the right word
Not even
for it, but I don't think it is. For the state to apologize to this man, he qualifies under the state passed victim compensation fund. We know he went through this abuse, Rick. That is undisputed at this point. He went through this abuse. He witnessed what he witnessed in that torture chamber. And now, after apologizing, providing compensation, well, here's your check. And by the way, here's your death warrant. Come on. That's in our society, in a just society, this would not happen.
Well, right now, the execution's set for September 30th. The last hope for Victor Tony Jones is for some sort of reprieve from the governor's office. Probably not likely.
Probably not, given the history of the execution since Governor DeSantis came in. But like I said, this is not an indictment on the death penalty. This is not a situation or I think, I'm not going to speak for the other folks or other friends of the court, because I think it's important for your listeners to know this. What we filed was what's referred to as a friend of the court brief. Because of our unique situation and our interest in the litigation, we want to give the court our opinion on what should happen. Obviously, the court has denied that, and so now it solely rests in the hands of Governor DeSantis. And I hope, because he obviously signed the bill. I was there the day he signed the bill, Rick. I was standing right next to him. It was a proud moment, and I know the governor was happy, and the governor was proud to do it, because this is something that should have been done many, 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 many governors ago. And so it was great for Governor DeSantis to sign the bill, and we appreciate that and appreciate his support. But in this situation, it should not. These should be considered as mitigating factors in this death penalty.
Troy, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate it. Always. Have a great one. And I love the poster behind you there, Tombstone.
Thanks for watching, and to keep up with what's going on, be sure and subscribe. Just click on the little dog to the right and click the subscribe button. You can also like this video and click on the bell, which will notify you of new content. This really helps the channel grow. We appreciate you.